The hum of the office printer was the only sound in the conference room as my boss, Richard, leaned back in his chair, his tie loosened and his smile too smug for a Monday morning. After 12 years of running the operations department at Crestwood Logistics, I'd been called in for what I thought was a routine performance review. Instead, Richard slid a single sheet of paper across the table. "We're restructuring, Victoria," he said, his voice clipped. "My nephew, Ethan, is taking over your role. You're out, effective Friday." My stomach dropped, the words landing like a punch. 12 years of late nights, solved crises, and record profits, and he was replacing me with his barely out-of-college nephew. I opened my mouth to protest, but Richard cut me off. "Don't make this messy. It's just business. My name is Victoria Mitchell, and at 38, I'd just been betrayed by the man I'd trusted to value my work." But as I left that room, my hands trembling, I swore Richard would learn what messy really meant. Before Richard's words turned my world upside down, life had been a symphony of purpose and pride, each day a note in a carefully composed melody. I'd carved out a fulfilling existence in Denver, Colorado, where the Rocky Mountains stood sentinel against the horizon, their peaks dusted with snow even in summer. My mornings began in my modest apartment, a haven of exposed brick walls and hardwood floors, where sunlight spilled through tall windows, warming the succulents lined along my sill. I'd brew a pot of dark roast coffee, the rich aroma filling the air as I sipped from a ceramic mug, scrolling through emails on my phone. The drive to Crestwood Logistics was a ritual, the city waking up around me, baristas wiping down counters, joggers weaving through downtown parks, the radio humming with morning talk shows. Crestwood's office was a sleek, glass-walled building, its lobby adorned with framed awards for operational excellence, many of which I'd helped earn. As operations manager, I thrived in the controlled chaos of logistics, coordinating cross-country shipments, negotiating with suppliers, untangling delays that could cost millions. I'd once spent an entire weekend rerouting a fleet of trucks during a blizzard, saving a major client's holiday delivery schedule. My team, a tight-knit group of 10, was my second family. We'd share potluck lunches in the break room, trading stories about weekend hikes or kids' soccer games, and celebrate milestones, like landing a $5 million contract, with pitchers of IPA at the local brewery. I'd poured my heart into this job, sacrificing weekends, holidays, and even relationships that couldn't withstand my relentless schedule. A boyfriend once called me married to Crestwood, and he wasn't entirely wrong. I'd missed my sister Jenna's 30th birthday party to handle a supply chain crisis, promising to make it up with a weekend trip that never materialized. But the sacrifices felt worth it. Crestwood was my proving ground, where my meticulous planning and problem-solving shone. I'd built systems that slashed delivery times by 20%, earning praise from clients and a reputation as the company's backbone. Richard, my boss, had been my mentor, a grizzled veteran who'd seen my potential when I was a nervous coordinator fresh out of college. He'd taught me the art of negotiation, the importance of documentation, and I'd repaid him with unwavering loyalty, believing in his vision for Crestwood's growth. My life outside work was quieter but rich. Sunday calls with Jenna were a highlight, her laughter over her third grader's antics grounding me. I'd hike the trails near Boulder with friends, the crunch of gravel underfoot and the scent of pine clearing my mind. My apartment was filled with books, biographies, business strategy, the occasional novel, stacked on shelves beside framed photos of my travels, a solo trip to Seattle, a family reunion in Asheville. Everything was stable, a carefully balanced ecosystem, until Richard's betrayal uprooted it all. The signs of his disloyalty had crept in slowly, like cracks spreading across a frozen lake, visible only if you knew where to look. 6 months ago, Richard started mentioning his nephew, Ethan, a business school grad with fresh perspectives. At first, it was harmless. Ethan was interning, sitting in on meetings, scribbling notes with a pen that cost more than my monthly rent. Richard asked me to train him, his tone casual. "Show him the ropes, Victoria. He's got potential." I agreed, spending hours explaining our routing software, supplier contracts, and safety protocols. But Ethan was a puzzle I couldn't solve. His questions were rudimentary: how to access the shared drive, what a bill of lading was, and his work was careless. He once sent a client the wrong shipment schedule, nearly costing us a $200,000 account. I fixed it, staying up until 3 a.m. to reroute the trucks, while Ethan shrugged, saying, "My bad." I assumed he'd improve, but Richard's praise grew louder, almost performative. "Ethan's thinking outside the box," he'd say in staff meetings, while my detailed reports on cost efficiencies were skimmed over. I noticed other shifts. Richard stopped inviting me to executive briefings, claiming they were above my pay grade. My emails to him went unanswered for days, only to receive vague replies like, "We'll circle back." One afternoon, I found a printed email in the copier tray, an exchange between Richard and the CFO about transitioning operations leadership. My name wasn't mentioned, but Ethan's was, alongside phrases like "new blood" and "cost-effective." My pulse quickened, but I dismissed it as paranoia. Then there was Ethan's behavior. He'd linger in Richard's office, their laughter spilling into the hallway. Once, I overheard him on a call, joking, "Yeah, I'll be running this place soon. Victoria's great, but she's old school." The words stung, not just for their arrogance but for the confidence behind them. Another time, he misplaced a critical supplier contract, blaming me when Richard asked. I found it in his desk drawer, misfiled, and corrected the error without a word, my unease growing. I'd built a digital archive, the vault, where I stored every email, contract, and report, a habit from my early days when a colleague tried to take credit for my work. Looking back, I should have dug into it sooner, but loyalty blinded me. I trusted Richard, believed he valued my contributions. The cracks were there, but I didn't want to see the fracture. In the conference room, as Richard's announcement hit, the betrayal was a blade, sharp and precise. My hands gripped the table, the wood's grain pressing into my palms as I fought to keep my face neutral. 12 years, countless crises averted, millions saved, and he was handing my role to Ethan, a kid who couldn't file a contract correctly. The injustice was staggering, but the humiliation burned hotter. Richard's eyes were flinty, his smirk daring me to argue. "You'll get a severance package," he said, nudging the paper closer. "Sign by tomorrow, and we'll make this smooth." Smooth? The word was a mockery. I wanted to unleash a torrent, list every late night, every client I'd won, every time I'd covered for his mistakes. But I knew emotion would only feed his narrative: Victoria, the hysterical manager, unable to handle change. I'd seen him dismiss others that way, and I wouldn't give him the satisfaction. Instead, I took the paper, my fingers steady despite the storm inside. "I'll review it," I said, my voice calm, almost cold. Richard's smirk twitched, as if he'd expected a breakdown. I stood, smoothed my blazer, and walked out, my heels clicking down the hallway, each step a pulse of resolve. I wasn't just hurt. I was furious. And fury, I knew, could be a weapon if wielded right. That night, I sat at my kitchen table, the severance agreement untouched, a glass of red wine catching the lamplight. The apartment was silent, the hum of the fridge a faint echo of my racing thoughts. I replayed the meeting, Richard's smugness, Ethan's unearned confidence. I thought of my team, who'd be blindsided, and the clients who relied on me. And I thought of my younger self, the eager coordinator who'd idolized Richard, hanging on his every word. I'd given Crestwood my prime years, missing family dinners, postponing dreams of travel, even ending a promising relationship because I was always needed at work. The memory of Jenna's disappointed voice when I missed her birthday party stung anew. "It's fine," she'd said, but it wasn't. Nothing about this was fine. I opened my laptop, the screen's glow harsh against the dim room, and logged into the vault. Years of records unfolded, contracts, performance metrics, emails, incident reports. Every decision, every triumph, meticulously documented. And there, in the shadows of those files, was something else, proof of Richard's failures. The supplier contract he'd pushed despite my warnings, costing $500,000. The safety violations I'd flagged, buried to avoid scrutiny. I'd protected him, out of loyalty, believing we were a team. Now, that loyalty was ash, and those files were my arsenal. I wasn't leaving quietly. I was going to leave Crestwood in chaos. The next morning, I woke with a clarity that cut through the fog of betrayal. The pain was still there, a dull ache in my chest, but it was fuel now, driving me forward. I didn't sign the severance agreement. Instead, I called Carla Reyes, my lawyer, a woman with a razor-sharp mind and a knack for spotting corporate weak points. "I've been fired without cause," I told her, my voice steady as I emailed her the agreement and key files from the vault. "And I have evidence of mismanagement that could sink the company." Carla's response was immediate, her tone laced with intrigue. "This is more than wrongful termination, Victoria. If these files hold up, we're looking at a major case, maybe even board-level consequences. Send me everything." I spent the morning digging deeper into the vault, pulling every damning document. There was the 2021 supplier deal, where Richard ignored my analysis of the vendor's shaky financials, leading to a $500,000 loss when they defaulted. I'd drafted a memo warning him, which he dismissed as overcautious. There were emails about safety violations at a warehouse, faulty equipment, ignored inspections, that I'd reported, only to be told to focus on priorities. I'd documented every incident, every ignored warning, saving them in the vault out of instinct, not malice. Now, those instincts were my salvation. I met Carla for lunch at a quiet cafe, the clink of coffee cups and murmur of conversations a soothing contrast to my churning thoughts. She reviewed the files, her eyes narrowing as she scrolled. "Richard's been reckless," she said, tapping her pen against her notebook. "And replacing you with an unqualified relative. That's a lawsuit waiting to happen. We'll start with a demand letter and prepare to escalate." I nodded, feeling the first spark of empowerment. Richard thought he'd erased me, but I was about to rewrite the story. The turning point came that afternoon when I remembered the client contracts. Crestwood's three biggest accounts, Apex Shipping, Horizon Freight, and Pinnacle Logistics, were worth $10 million annually, and I was their linchpin. I'd spent years building trust with their CEOs, meeting them for coffee in sleek downtown bistros, answering late-night calls to resolve urgent issues, even attending their company retreats to pitch new strategies. The contracts were up for renewal next month, and I'd been quietly negotiating terms, with draft agreements sitting in my inbox. But here was the twist: the contracts were tied to me. The clients had insisted on clauses naming me as their dedicated manager, a detail I'd included to protect Crestwood's interests. Richard, in his haste to push me out, hadn't reviewed them. I called Margaret Chen, Apex's CEO, a woman whose no-nonsense demeanor I'd always admired. "I've been let go," I told her, keeping my tone professional. "Ethan, Richard's nephew, is taking over." Margaret's pause was heavy, her voice sharp when she spoke. "Ethan? The kid who sent me a blank email last month. No way we're working with him." I didn't push, but I didn't need to. "I'm exploring new opportunities," I said. "I'll keep you posted." Margaret's response was firm. "You're the reason we stayed with Crestwood. If you're out, so are we." I called the other two CEOs, Horizon's David Patel and Pinnacle's Susan Klein, both echoing Margaret's sentiment. "We signed because of you," David said. "Ethan doesn't know the first thing about our needs." By the end of the day, I had verbal commitments from all three to follow me if I started my own firm. The power shift was exhilarating, but I kept it quiet. Richard and Ethan needed to think they'd won, for now. Over the next 2 days, I moved with the precision of a strategist plotting a checkmate. I met with Carla again, this time at her office, where framed degrees lined the walls and the air smelled faintly of leather and coffee. She'd drafted a demand letter for Richard, citing wrongful termination and referencing the mismanagement evidence without revealing specifics. "This'll rattle him," she said, sliding the letter across her desk. "It demands reinstatement or a substantial settlement, with a veiled threat to go to the board." I nodded, imagining Richard's face when he read it. Next, I contacted my team, meeting them one by one at a diner near the office, the scent of fried eggs and bacon grounding our tense conversations. "Ethan's taking over," I told Sam, my deputy, over a steaming mug of coffee. "But I'm not disappearing. Stay sharp." Sam's jaw clenched, his loyalty fierce. "We're with you, Victoria. This is a disgrace." I met with my analysts, Mia and Javier, and our scheduler, Rachel, each pledging to support me. "We can't work under Ethan," Mia said. "He doesn't even know the software." Their trust was a lifeline, and I hinted at my plans, a new venture, a chance to work together again. Finally, I compiled the board report, a 50-page dossier of Richard's failures, backed by emails, financials, and my ignored memos. I spent hours cross-referencing data, ensuring every claim was ironclad. The supplier deal, the safety violations, even a questionable expense report Richard had submitted for a client dinner that coincided with Ethan's internship start, all laid bare. I didn't send it yet. I wanted Richard to feel the ground crumbling first. By Thursday, I'd laid the groundwork, each move a thread in a tapestry of justice I was weaving. Richard thought he'd cut me out, but I was stitching a new future, one where he'd face the consequences of his arrogance. Friday was my last day, and Richard expected me to slip away, a footnote in Crestwood's history. Instead, I walked into the office with my head high, my laptop wiped of personal files, my desk cleared of anything that wasn't company property. Ethan was at my station, fumbling with a spreadsheet I'd designed, his brow furrowed as he clicked aimlessly. "Good luck," I told him, my voice neutral but laced with irony. He smirked, oblivious to the storm brewing. Richard summoned me to his office, the severance agreement still unsigned on his desk, its edges curling slightly. "You're making a mistake," he said, his tone tight with irritation. "Sign, and we'll part amicably." I leaned forward, meeting his gaze, my voice steady as steel. "Amicably? You replaced me with your unqualified nephew after 12 years. There's nothing amicable about that." His jaw tightened, a flicker of unease in his eyes. "I'll pass on the severance," I said, standing. "But you'll hear from me soon." I walked out, the office buzzing around me, phones ringing, keyboards clacking, my team stealing glances of support. That evening, I sent Carla's demand letter to Richard's email, copying his assistant to ensure he couldn't ignore it. Then, I emailed my report to the board, addressing it to the chairman, CFO, and general counsel, with a subject line that read, "Urgent, operational mismanagement concerns." The chaos was ignited, and I was the spark. The fallout was a corporate earthquake, shaking Crestwood to its core. By Monday morning, Margaret Chen had emailed Richard, formally withdrawing Apex Shipping's $4 million contract, citing a breach of trust in leadership transitions. Horizon Freight and Pinnacle Logistics followed within hours, their CEOs sending nearly identical notices, each referencing my departure. Together, the three accounts represented $10 million, nearly a third of Crestwood's annual revenue. The board convened an emergency meeting, and my report was the centerpiece, its 50 pages dissecting Richard's failures with surgical precision. Sam called me that afternoon, his voice a mix of awe and glee. "It's a complete shitshow, Victoria. Richard's blaming Ethan, saying he was misled about his readiness. Ethan's blaming Richard for rushing him. The board's livid, and the CFO's talking about an audit. The safety violations I'd flagged triggered an immediate internal review, and whispers of a federal investigation began circulating. Ethan's first week as manager was a disaster, missed shipments, delayed invoices, a client complaint about a $50,000 error in scheduling. Smaller clients, sensing instability, started exploring competitors, and Crestwood's stock plummeted 15% by Wednesday, wiping out millions in market value. Richard tried to contain the damage, sending a company-wide email about temporary challenges, but the cracks were too wide. My team, loyal to me, began updating their resumes, their frustration with Ethan palpable. He asked me how to log into the routing system, Rachel told me, exasperated. The system I showed him 3 times. The board's audit uncovered the shady supplier deal, and Richard's attempt to deflect blame only deepened their distrust. By Friday, he was summoned to explain himself, his golden reputation tarnished beyond repair. I wasn't watching from the sidelines. I filed a wrongful termination lawsuit, backed by Carla's airtight case. The demand letter had rattled Richard, and he called me Tuesday, his voice strained. Victoria, this is unnecessary. Let's settle this quietly. I let him talk, his desperation a stark contrast to his earlier smugness. Quietly. I said, my tone cold. You fired me for your nephew, Richard. You don't get to dictate the terms now. He offered a settlement, 6 figures, more than the severance, but Carla advised holding firm. He's scared, she said. The board report and client losses have him cornered. We can do better. Meanwhile, I launched Mitchell Logistics Solutions from a rented office downtown, a cramped space with flickering fluorescent lights and second-hand furniture. I poured my savings into it, renting laptops and software, my heart racing with every expense. Margaret Chen signed with me first, transferring Apex's contract with a handshake and a smile. You're the best in the business, she said. Horizon and Pinnacle followed, bringing $10 million in revenue. Sam, Mia, Javier, and Rachel joined me, their resignations hitting Crestwood like aftershocks. We worked late nights, fueled by takeout and ambition, mapping out client strategies on whiteboards. But the road wasn't smooth. Funding was tight, and I maxed out 2 credit cards to cover payroll. A competitor spread rumors that my firm was unstable, and a potential client backed out, citing risk. I'd lie awake at night, doubting my choices, wondering if I'd burned too many bridges. Jenna was my anchor, visiting with homemade lasagna and fierce encouragement. You're building something real, she said, squeezing my hand. Don't stop. My team's loyalty kept me grounded, Sam's quiet efficiency, Mia's creative pitches, Rachel's meticulous schedules. We landed a new client, a $2 million account, and celebrated with cheap wine, the taste of victory sweeter than any brewery IPA. The consequences for Crestwood deepened over months. The board placed Richard on administrative leave, his office emptied of his framed awards. Ethan was demoted to a junior role, his vision exposed as incompetence when he cost another client $100,000 with a misquoted contract. The federal investigation into the safety violations gained traction, with inspectors swarming the warehouse, citing violations that could lead to hefty fines. Crestwood's stock fell another 10%, and industry blogs ran headlines like, Crestwood's Leadership Crisis, a cautionary tale. Smaller clients continued to defect, and the company laid off a dozen staff to cut costs, morale plummeting. Richard tried to salvage his image, giving an interview to a local paper, claiming he'd been misadvised by advisors. But the damage was done. His network, once vast, shrank as colleagues distanced themselves, and his LinkedIn profile went silent, his last post a hollow boast about new horizons. My lawsuit progressed, with Carla uncovering more evidence, a performance review where Richard had rated me exemplary just weeks before my firing, contradicting his restructuring excuse. The board, desperate to avoid a public trial, pushed for a settlement, and Carla negotiated hard, securing $1.2 million, enough to stabilize my firm and fund future growth. A year later, I stood in the new office of Mitchell Logistics Solutions, a sleek space with floor-to-ceiling windows and a view of the Rockies, their peaks catching the morning light. We'd grown to 15 employees, with contracts worth $15 million and a feature in a national business magazine, Women Leading the Way. The scholarship I'd funded, named after my first mentor, was supporting 3 women studying logistics, their thank you letters framed on my wall. I'd hired a mentor for them, a retired executive who shared my passion for documentation, ensuring their paths would be smoother than mine. The lawsuit money had paid off debts and funded a training program for my team, boosting our efficiency. Jenna visited often, her pride evident as she toured the office, marveling at the hustle around her. "You did this," she said, her eyes shining. My team had become a family, sharing inside jokes and celebrating birthdays with homemade cakes. We'd faced challenges, a client dispute, a software glitch, but each hurdle strengthened us, proving we were more than Crestwood's cast-offs. Richard's career was over. He'd moved to a smaller city, reportedly consulting for a struggling startup. Ethan was selling cars, his LinkedIn profile a ghost town. Crestwood limped along, its revenue slashed, its reputation scarred. I didn't revel in their downfall. I didn't need to. Their chaos was their own creation, a consequence of underestimating me. That evening, I hiked my favorite trail near Boulder, the air sharp with pine and the sky a deep indigo. Denver twinkled below, a canvas of light and possibility. I thought of Richard's smirk, his casual dismissal, and the 12 years I'd given to a company that discarded me. I thought of the nights I'd doubted myself, the sacrifices that had once felt futile. And I thought of the woman I'd become, not just a manager, but a leader, a creator, a force. I'd turned betrayal into a launchpad, not with rage, but with strategy, resilience, and a refusal to be erased. What do you do when someone tries to steal your place? You build an empire they can't touch, and you keep climbing.